week's explosive episode of Ninja Slayer, Nancy Lee brings her A-game to the table. And by A-game, I mean her big bouncy TNA. She also uses her sexy wiles to help Ninja Slayer in his never-ending quest to throw a shuriken in every ninja's face and to help him on his never-ending journey for justice. This week's episode was very fanservice-y. So fanservice-y to a point that it was a little off-putting. I think more off-putting for older viewers. It's the type of stuff that they'll lament. But then you have the younger teenage viewers. This is the type of episode that's gonna put them right through puberty. They're gonna love this episode. But despite that, this one did have some interesting developments. The big thing to take away from this episode, Ninja Slayer is finally starting to realize that he's gonna have to work with other people to accomplish his goals, and he can't just focus on killing ninjas. He has to focus on saving his master and the entire city from the Sokaya Syndicate. And he's gonna need some help, and that's where Nancy Lee comes in, and Dragon Gendozo. And in this week's episode, they go back to that other storyline from last week, where you have that one internet cyber robot ninja who's doing everything in his power to try and make Nancy Lee his wife. And he really forces himself upon her in this week's episode. But before we get to that, we have a little bit of action from the other ninja. We have Notorious, the big four-armed ninja, and his other buddy, Sawatari, who is a really funny character because they're still playing up the fact that he has these weird, freaky memories about being in the Vietnam War, and he's constantly telling Notorious to be quiet, he doesn't want to upset the Viet Cong. And that's very funny and a little offensive in some parts, but it leads to another really great action scene where Notorious is defeated by Ninja Slayer, he gets decapitated, we get the classic Sayonara! Sawatari says, screw this, gets the hell out of Dodge, and that brings us to this amazingly fan-servicey scene with Nancy Lee. Now, there are just so many blatant shots in this episode of her breasts, of her ass. There's a shot where Daedalus, the cyber ninja, is literally getting ready to rape her, and he even says, I'm getting ready to fuck you. It's a really off-putting and incredibly shocking scene that I didn't see coming and is probably going to offend some people, and honestly, I don't think it was necessary. It brought things down to this almost disturbing Berserk-like level, kind of reminding me of the last episode, and I don't think that really, meshes very well with the world of Ninja Slayer. I mean, a little fan service is one thing, but that was just a little dark and a little extreme. Luckily, Ninja Slayer does show up and he does end up saving the day with a little bit of help from Nancy, and they perform some moves here which are just ridiculous. And I love the fact that everybody seems to have their own catchphrase. You have Ninja Slayer who says "Yart" every single time he's attacking people, and then you have Nancy who constantly just says take this, take this, take this, while she's constantly kicking Daedalus in the face with reused animation. That, and of course they still keep using the Aqua Teen styled animation, and it's just as lazy as ever. There's a lot of scenes where Ninja Slayer is just carrying Nancy Lee around and she literally is just as flat as a board, and he's just carrying her around like she's just a big piece of cardboard paper. It's funny, and it does have some nice effects to it. But the end of the episode is where things start to get a little more interesting. We have the scene where Nancy Lee is getting ready to crack the code. She's trying to write this Tanuki thing on this calligraphy test, and if she doesn't do it in a certain amount of time, she's gonna die. And she ends up getting some help from her friend Jose, who's a character who's been mentioned before. We haven't seen him, and I'm not really sure what the deal is with this guy. If he's actually dead, if he's alive, what his relationship is to Nancy. Like, maybe he's a father, maybe he's a lover, maybe he's a mentor. We really don't know anything about this character, but he seemed to have materialized in this week's episode in this, big samurai's armor, and he was able to help out Nancy and allow her to solve this puzzle, which is going to get them even closer to getting the antivirus for Dragon Gendozo. Ending this week's episode, which was pretty freaking awesome. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of Ninja Slayer? Lots of big fan service in this week's episode. I was okay with it at first, They're always gonna show big boobs in anime series, especially in Studio Trigger. They're known for their fan service, but it did start to get a little too overboard at the end. But there was still a lot of room for laughs. Just like in last week's episode, I love whenever they connect online, you actually hear that old connecting to America online noise that nobody ever hears anymore. It's one of the reasons why I'm glad I grew up in the 90s, because it just makes me feel so old actually hearing that, and I think that's really funny. Otherwise, though, it was a very simple episode. It was almost like an exact continuation of last week's. It was basically just more of the same, except this time we got to see a little more action, and there were a few cool scenes, but for the most part, the action was played for laughs. Just a lot of crappy styled animation, and when I say crappy, I mean good crappy. There are a few scenes, like there's this one where Sawatari is actually punched by Ninja Slayer in this week's episode, and they actually managed to animate the entire punch, although this is followed by him just flying into a wall and then just sort of awkwardly turning around and leaving, which, again, just sort of amplify the humor just a little bit. I will say, though, I still love the designs of all the villains in the show. You know, Notorious is gone, but he had such a fantastic design. Kind of looked like a bigger, more freakier version of Goro from Mortal Kombat with a ninja mask. The big yellow color scheme and the pink, they really just sort of clash with each other and just pop right off the screen. Sawatari is also just another really interesting character. The fact that he has multiple personalities and that he's having these Vietnam War flashbacks is just so out of place, but it definitely adds another layer of humor to this episode. All the stuff with Nancy this week, you know, I'm just fully convinced she's just a fan service character. Simple as that. She was designed for that purpose, and she's certainly living up to that. Ninja Slayer himself is just more the same, just him being badass, awesome, and going on his quest to kill all ninja, although there was a little development at the end where he's going to start working with other people. This might mean we actually get to see that other student return. I believe her name was Koki, which would be cool because that means he's going to create like his own big ninja alliance with Nancy, I guess, being the sexy mascot. Otherwise, on the technical side of things, just like the rest of the series, everything looked pretty good when they actually did animate things. Everything else just, you know, more the same ridiculous, funny stick figure stuff. Lots of explosions, lots of bloods, decapitations, exploding heads, fan service, just another normal day in Ninja Slayer. So I'm going to give this week's episode right here a 4 out of 5. A pretty awesome, funny episode that has some moments that might be a little offensive to some people. Otherwise, this was still a fun episode that you should definitely check out if you've been following the anime version. But let's get excited, guys. We got to realize we're getting close to the halfway point of the series, and hopefully this means we'll get some more development for some of the characters. Maybe get to learn a little bit more about the villains, what their true motivations are going to be, and maybe we'll see this whole Dart Ninja, who always just sort of pop up out of nowhere and then just sort of disappear for a couple of episodes. Otherwise, this was a good episode right here. 4 out of 5 for me. Check it out, Ninja Slayer fans. So, I like this one a lot. I thought it was very fun and fan-servicey, but what about you guys? Do you have a favorite moment from this week's episode? A favorite action scene? What do you hope to see from the rest of Ninja Slayer? Please tell me in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching my review. Make sure to like it and share it with all of your friends. And make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you can see all of our latest anime and manga reviews and our brand new video podcast series, The Powerful Nerdcast. You guys can also follow us on social media. Thank you guys again for watching, and as always, sayonara!